Hi guys, good morning. Hey, I thought I would take a chance to go over a little bit on burner servicing, and specifically I'm going to do a little kind of a clean and check on the burners and check them out and make sure they all look good for an application that happens to be a Bryant furnace, condensing furnace with Inshot burners. So we'll give it a chance and see what happens. All right, guys, this is the second little mini video. I pulled off the front cover and I'm just kind of doing a quick visual, see what I'm looking at here for the most part with the furnace, to see if I see anything obvious out of the ordinary. Just again, normally anytime you're going to do a service call on anything, you want to kind of scan things over just to see what you're dealing with and make sure everything is going on. So one thing that I also did already is I had talked to the customer. They had said that the furnace, everything had been working fine. They just wanted it to be checked over just to make sure there's no issues or anything like that. So that's kind of a standard procedure. So just to make sure there's no issues. So one thing that we're going to do is, first thing I got to do is got to figure out exactly how I'm going to get the burners out and see what happens here. So specifically, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up pulling the front cover off on a sealed burner box, and then I'll shut the gas supply off, loosen up the union that's by the gas valve, and I should be able to tilt things back here depending on what screws I've got to take out. So let's get started. All right, guys, I pulled the first two screws out of the burner box cover. I've got that off. I'll set that to the side, and I'm gonna take a quick look inside of here, and you can kind of see what we're dealing with. So on this particular unit, we've got what I can see is a flame sensor, flame rod. Over here happens to be the hot surface igniter. You can see that way in the back. This particular unit was replaced in December of 2009, so we're going on 11 years on that igniter, which is phenomenal. So this will also be the time when I'll be taking that chance to just check that over and make sure I don't see anything obvious there, as well as anything in near the heat exchanger. Of course, in an older unit like this, the one thing I definitely am going to do is a combustion analysis when I'm all done, just to make sure that we are in good shape. All right, so let's get things started. All right, so I got the first two screws over on the left side, and I got the first two screws on the right side to be able to get the manifold out. I don't want to stress the wires on the gas valve, so I'm going to kind of go in on this a little bit and just identify that. So on this particular gas valve, on terminal number 3 on this particular gas valve, we got a blue wire and we have a brown wire in the middle, identifying the common on this particular unit. And so I'm going to end up disconnecting this just because I don't want to stress out all of those areas on that on the gas valve or any of those terminals to create any problem. So the other thing that I am going to do is I'm also going to disconnect the hose that's connected up from the gas valve regulator all the way up into the burner box area to give that reference pressure. So I'm going to disconnect that to make sure that it's all good, as well as disconnect the union that I have over here. So I can get a couple of things done. This one I'll pull off, squeeze that. That one was on pretty tight, so it didn't want to come off at all. This particular one, of course, the power is off to the furnace, and I'm always careful a little bit. I don't want to, when I pull wires off, I don't want to wreck any of the terminals. Otherwise, I'm going to end up spending time replacing those. So if I can avoid that, I'm going to try to do that. So my union that's over here on this inlet line, I'm going to take that off. Obviously, pull that one off. Just all I got to do is loosen up. The rest I can get by hand. The guys that did the piping in this job did a really nice job putting a union close like this. If they would have put it up here, it would have been functional, but I would have had to pull this whole thing off to be able to get at it. So now there's a clip that's on the manifold. I'm going to pull this off and make sure that that's all good. Okay. All right. Our gas, we'll call it our gas train. So we've got our gas valve. We have our, what we consider our manifold, and then we also happen to have, in here we happen to have 3 orifices on here. So these particular orifices all have a number on them. So one of the things that I specifically am usually looking for on these is I'll look to see if there's any type of dirt or anything on there. So I actually have a small drill set, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll just poke it through the back side of these things. Not to drill them out or wrecking them at all, but I just want to make sure there's no dirt or anything like that. The only thing that would do primarily, if there's dirt or cobwebs or spider webs or anything like that that would be inside of here, and that does happen, is sometimes what'll happen is that will disrupt the gas as it comes out of there, and it may either block it and cause those burners to be underfired on a particular one. Even though you have the right gas pressure, it wouldn't necessarily give you the right fuel input. So that's one thing I'm going to look for. I'm not overly worried about sizing the orifices at this time, but you know, I'll just kind of look to make sure they look decent. So this one here happens to be a number 55. There's a number stamped on each one of those things, and I'll do that in another lesson where I'll go through the sizing on to see if this is the right size. But otherwise, everything else here looked pretty normal. I got to get at the burners. On this particular one here, there is a there's 2 screws on the very top on that top plate. I'm gonna have to get those 2 screws out and be able to get the burners in. The burners will come out. One of the things you might have noticed is on the particular burners, you might have caught that there was some PVC shavings that was probably from whenever somebody had done some work on this or did the piping and probably didn't clean out some of the shavings and cuttings in there. So those things can get caught in there, but typically they would have gotten burned up or anything if it would have gone inside the burners from just the residual heat. So these can come out. All right. So here's the first burner, and there's a couple of things that I want to kind of point out. So let's see if I can get a good glimpse of this one right in here. So on this particular burner, there's a couple of things that I want to just kind of point out a little bit. On the far left side on this particular application. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about each of these burners and exactly what they're doing. So on this particular unit, we have 3 burners, and they all come out individually. And some of the units, however, they will come as an actual complete assembly. Either way, they work just fine, not an issue at all. So this one here, I'm going to take this one out, the second one, and there's no particular order that they have to go in, but I generally, if I'm taking them out and I put them back in, I usually try to get them in the same order if at all possible. So when I lay them out or service them, I usually work on that. On the burners themselves, they have what they call a crossover port. So I'll identify it on the first one here, and then we'll hit it up on. But essentially what we're trying to do is when we light one of the burners, the one on the far right in this case, that will allow the gas that's coming out of these orifices on the first burner that would light off, and it'll go from burner to burner to burner and just keep allowing each of those to light off. So this crossover port is really a significant area. Now there's certainly some rust on these particular systems, but nothing that would be of any alarm on these things. They're actually looking pretty good. So I'll identify a couple other things that I see as a problem. Related to the first cross that I'm going to be looking for, so in this port right in here, there's a small, what looks like probably a little bit bigger than a 1/16 of an inch, but that little crossover assembly, that has to allow a little bit of gas to flow into there. So what has to happen is that needs to be clean to allow for crossover or burner to burner light off. So burners that generally have a problem where they don't light off, or maybe they'll go out on maybe a flame failure or something like that, these will usually get all rusted up and they'll have really loud light off. So that doesn't work so good. So this is one of the things that we're going to be looking for, is to clean this area and to clean the retention ring, which is this device, and make sure those holes, there's several holes in there, that has to be open in here. So each of those has to be open and just allow for gas to flow into there. So the purpose of this retention ring is to actually give the place for the flame to anchor onto. One of the things with Inshot burners is the burners have a very high, what I would call port loading. So they basically put a lot of gas in a very small area. And that's one of the characteristics of this particular burner. So it requires something that will allow the flame, the burner, to anchor on. And that's typical of most Inshot burners. Now there's a few different types out there that they use smaller burners, smaller ports. They have a little bit higher velocity coming out of some of those things, and some of those will, they may not have that retention ring, but on these, they generally always will. So I'm going to clean this one up here, and I'll make sure there's no dust, dirt, debris, or anything on this side of things. Make sure everything looks all good. So what I like to use is, to clean these, is I usually like to use either a wire brush. I've got either a wire brush, a lot of the surface rust you can see is clearly off of that. What I will also do is I'll end up taking a small little piece of emery cloth, and I'll slide that in there, or some open mesh screen, and I'll just slide that in there. A putty knife, and just go in there and try to, if there's rust and debris in there, I want to get those cleaned out. But again, have to make sure the crossovers are good. But yeah, so far everything looks pretty good. And of course I'll blow the dust and dirt out of them with, usually I just use my shop vac, or if I have a little compressed air, that'll work also pretty good. Don't worry about all the surface rust a little bit on these. That's all pretty typical, pretty normal on burners. So again, just this one, I can see those are really, really in great shape, and this side as well. If I look right into here, I can actually see light. I can see a continuation through all the way to the retention ring, and all the way through this one if I look deep enough. So these burners are really in phenomenal shape. So ones that are so unbelievably rusty, or they're tight, as long as you can get replacement burners, I would suggest changing those burners, especially if you're on LP gas. If you're using LP gas, I might even suggest seeing if there is a stainless steel burner available. Most of the people recommend that you actually go to a higher quality burner on an LP system, just simply because the LP gases they burn so fast, and they'll sit back further into the burner, and they tend to create a lot more of problems on a burner to plug up and to create a problem. So that's one of the things to consider. All right, so we just have the last one to do. Now, if you don't want to use one of those brushes, which is fine, a regular old wire brush works awesome. They work great on that as well. I happen to have a wire brush. Another option would have been that I could have cleaned them this way. Again, totally fine, maybe just as easy. whatever a person happens to have that's readily available. That's one way to do it. The other way, specifically on the crossovers, what I was referring to, is I happen to have a putty knife, and on a burner that is good, you should be able to fit that putty knife in there, and just to make sure that it's all clear and clean. So this one is, like as I had said, this one was exceptional. No issues there. I was able to get that putty knife in there. No effort really at all. It just goes right in. So these burners are absolutely phenomenal. Very, very good. So again, I'll check all of these over, and very good on these. And of course, the last one again. So one thing that you want to be a little careful, if you happen to have a unit that where this is starting to get rusted, be very careful not to expand or not to try to open them up too much with any type of a putty knife or anything like that. If that gets too big, you're going to get just a little bit too much gas and the other thing through this area, which is not where you really want it, and it may loosen up that retention ring and have it come out or stick out a little bit too far. So just be a little bit careful on that, but generally not a problem. These things are in great shape. I don't see any issues at all. Both sides of them look great. I don't see any issues whatsoever, but nice crossovers. They're in great shape. They're all they're not all closed in or rusted. They're not too big. So everything looks really, really good. So you might have caught that when I happened to be pulling those burners out, one of the things that I was concerned a little bit about was I was trying to make sure that I did not just rip that burner out. And right in the back side of this particular unit is the hot surface igniter. And some of the things that I'll look for visually on that igniter is that it is pretty good, you know, that it doesn't have any white spots or anything that would show any serious problems. But this particular igniter looks absolutely phenomenal. And the flame rod that's in here, that one, while I am doing this service, I'm definitely going to pull that one out as well. I will get my light in there as well, and I'll do a quick visual of if anything that I see inside heat exchanger. There, I'm going to pull this flame rod out and just kind of double check it or go through it a little bit. So this particular one is pretty well recessed in here, so I'm going to take this one out with this particular one. Now, these are not super fragile, so it's not like you got to concern yourself that they're going to break or anything like that. So I'll pull that one out. I'll just set that screw right here for the moment. That one's kind of a smaller screw, so because it's a little different size screw than the others, I'm going to make sure that I don't mix that one up. So paying attention to some of those things. So in this particular one, I can definitely see some dirt on here, and I'll clean it up while I'm at it. All right, gang, I'd like to deal with this particular, just show you a little bit on one of the things that we'll do when we do our preventive maintenance and our service on our burners is I want to just check over the flame rod to see how dirty it is, to see if it really needs cleaning or not. Now, I still would probably clean it anyways, but at least then I'll have a better idea of how effective it is or how much it really needed it. So I happen to have an ohm meter, a VOM meter that I have set to ohms already. And what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to be looking and watching the resistance to see how much variation that I am getting. So what I have is one of my leads is attached to the one of the probes on here, on that end. And then I am intentionally not trying to touch the metal rod. However, it shouldn't really be a big deal. I'll take my other lead and I'm going to slide that through basically back and forth. Now my flame is going to be on this particular area, and I've got to get this in a spot where I can see it. And I've got I'm going to put this flame rod so everything so far is super good. I saw it jump up to about 5-6 ohms in a couple of spots. So I'm gonna recheck it on another spot. So this is the side where the flame would have been on. So I'm gonna just go up and down this area here. This is an area that's a little bit rusty, and it's still Yep, there was a couple of spots that went to 18 ohms, but a lot of it is super good. So all I'm doing is I'm just sliding up or down, and I can check into multiple spots. But this one, as I'd said, it looked good, but I'm going to still clean it anyways. So, all right. So what I usually like to use on these to clean the flame rod is a piece of steel wool. So I have some extra fine steel wool, and I like to do that. It works better than emery cloth or any type of a high grit type material. You don't want to really do this. And this is true of any type of a furnace that utilizes a flame rod or any type of what they call a flame rectification detection system. So what I'll be doing is taking this thing, and I can slide it back and forth. I can essentially slide it up and down, however, any way you want to clean it. What I'm trying to avoid is getting any big grooves or anything like that in this particular one. And I don't, again, it's phenomenal. It's in great shape. Some of the ones on LP gas, you'll actually see once they are done with, once they've been burning or running for a little while, and some of them, this will start to bubble up and it'll actually deteriorate. So and I've seen them where they just fell right off. So those obviously would be no heat calls, and they wouldn't work. So let's take a look. And but this one's in great shape. I'm gonna retest it one more time while I'm doing this with you guys, and just for little educational purposes. I got the first section in here. I'll make sure that I don't lose my connection. And all of my resistance are super low, 0.1. That's all phenomenal. So this thing is in great shape. So flame rod, I'd like to just take a couple of minutes here, and we'll take a look at where those burners were, where they're going. And I've got a light here that I'm going to try to shine in there, and I'll hopefully be able to show you specifically what's inside those heat exchanger cells to see if I see anything that would be seriously wrong with them. So now, of course, we're going to visually look for any types of cracks or anything like that. If there's a little bit of rust in those areas, I'm not overly concerned about that, but as long as it's not too major. But we'll take a look. So the middle one here, that one actually looks really looks phenomenal. The one on the far left side, that one looks really good. I don't see any areas at all that would be signs that it would be cracked. And even on our far right side, that one, I see a little bit of rust to the left side of this all the way down, but I don't see anything, a little bit on the right side. So for whatever reason, one thing I can definitely tell is there's definitely more heat that is on the far right side, just simply by the discoloration and the excessive amount of rust, or the extra amount of rust that I'm seeing here. But I don't identify any cracks or anything in here, so that really looks great. So definitely going to get the shop vac out next, and we're going to get this stuff all vacuumed up in here and make sure there's no issues. All right, guys, I wanted to cleaning up the insides of this thing. There's a whole lot of dirt and junk that's inside that burner box. I'd like to make sure that those are all clean. All right, so on this particular unit, one of the other things that we definitely want to check is the intake pipe to make sure there's no obstructions or anything like this. So you can get leaves and any type of material or debris that might have got in from the outside. Definitely want to get that checked. So we're going to remove that one here. This one here, there happens to be a Fernco coupling that we should be able to take off. Now to loosen this pipe, and as we can tell, just a little tiny bit of debris. I'll make sure I get all that cleaned up, but very little. But it is not uncommon to see a whole bunch of leaves and any other type of debris that might be in that system. So we'll get it cleaned up. Being able to have to check this pipe and the intake, that's exactly the reason why you don't want to ever glue that pipe to the furnace. So on some furnaces you might have the ability to actually glue it, but that would not be a good idea. All right, so want to reassemble these burners and put those back in the unit. So one thing I needed to point out a little bit on this one is when we install them, there is some of these tabs that are going to overlap. So we have one to the next to the next. So then it probably makes the most sense to put the one on the far right in first, and then the next one will sit on top of that, and then the next one will fit on top of the other tab on the far left side so that they fit appropriately. So there's not really a top and a bottom, they're all going to work the same. So anyways, we'll set that one in here. I want to be really careful not to touch or hit the igniter because that will indeed break it. All right, so as you can see, I've got burner, from the far right side all the way to the left side. My crossovers are set up and they're in place. It might be a little hard to see with this particular tab in the way, but they will work just fine and we'll be able to see it when we get it all done. So at this point, the next piece that I need to put in here is the top plate that we had pulled out. This little top piece here, that's really only just to kind of prevent the burners from being lifted up and lifted out of there. So otherwise there's really no major function in there. There. Alright, so that's in there. So those are in there, that's all set up in there. So next is the manifold for the one of the areas that I wanted to just hit up on, and again, I didn't have any issues at all. The customer didn't have any issues with the burners or anything like that. Everything was fine, but I did want to show you what I meant by that. So if I take a light, might be able to see if there's any blockages at all in these orifices, and I don't. But I wanted to show you. I took a very small drill, and I've got the back side of the drill, not the side that actually drills or that would do the cutting, and essentially a very small bit, and all I do is I take that and I put that inside of here, and just to make sure that there's nothing that's starting, just more or less disrupting anything at all. Same thing applies in here. So those all look good, no problems at all, but I didn't, like I said, I didn't see any earlier, so no concerns there at all. So now we got to put this back in. Alright, so there's a grommet here. Should be easy enough to do. We'll be able to get that clip in here, get that into place. This will slide right in. Now the biggest thing that you got to remember when you're putting these back in is to make sure that you get each burner, the end of the burner has got to be, it's got to fit into the holes where the port went, and if a person doesn't line that up, it is not going to go in there. Sometimes that's the biggest trick to trying to get those in, to get those to go in properly. So it's one of those where you can't really force it, you got to do them in order. So on this particular one, this one here happens to be, I've got to do the first one on the right side, and then I'll work my way over to do the second and third one, and they are in good shape. Alright, and just to hold this in place, while I'm doing this, I'm just going to put the union a little bit loose on here, and then I'll be able to get that going. So these are in there. I'll be able to put the screws in there to hold that in place. I was putting my hands in behind here just to make sure that those were lined up, and they're all in there. They're not, it's not a problem. I've seen in some of the service calls I've gone on where I'll go in there and the orifice is against the end of that burner, where that little tiny ring on the inlet to the burners, that orifice was on the face of it, and whatever technician happened to be working on it, he probably didn't catch it, and then what happened was it ended up just crushing that and disrupting it, and creates a problem for the amount of airflow that can go through the burner. It's not, all these burners are always designed to have the gas going right down the middle of that burner straight in, so that it can pull that air and induce the air into that for the primary air. So when I'm putting these manifolds in there, I usually will put the screws in real loosely. I don't get too aggressive with that, just so I have a little bit of wiggle room, but these I had lined up really nice, so no issues there. There, nice and snug, no issues, everything looks good. Now for the clip. So the clip primarily is designed to help us keep all of our wires and things like that out of the way. So we're going to get that one right on this particular manifold, make sure they're not in the flames or anything like that. So we'll make sure no problems there. So these are all set up nicely, they're off the metal, everything is good. If this burner box would get hot, again, no problems here whatsoever. So this is all good. Burners are clean, put in, ready to go. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'll reconnect the hoses. As I had mentioned, this particular hose earlier, it's got a hose that comes directly from the burner box to measure the amount of pressure that's in this burner box. That has to go back down and feed directly back into the gas valve, so that it knows how, the gas valve has to know how much pressure is in there, how much negative pressure would be in there, to know if it needs to open up or close down the regulator to feed the proper amount of fuel. So this one I can put on here. A little tip that I wanted to share with you guys earlier. So earlier when I first took this off, it was a little tough to get this one off. So what I took was my channel lock that I have here, and I just rotated the hose a little bit to get that to go off. So that was really no problem on here. And now I'll use that to put my clamp in here. I'm going to reconnect my connections on here. This particular gas valve happens to be a 24 volts AC line. It really doesn't matter which one you connect up as far as which one you do first. So if you forgot, you could always look at the wiring diagram and identify what would be set up as the main or the common, and that would be the other way. Otherwise, this one, it wouldn't make any difference in there. There are some that would, but this one does not. Burners are in. All I'm left to do on this particular one is let's tighten up the union. So in tightening up these unions, there's the metal-to-metal contact is what does all of the sealing. There's absolutely no need whatsoever to put any type of pipe dope or anything on the actual union faces or anything like that. So what we're going to do is I'll set this up, tighten this up. So I've got my wrenches are opposite or whatever. I'll just snug it up and it should be good to go. So that one's all tight. Everything is in good shape. Everything's in line up. I should be able to turn my gas back on. All right. I finished up putting the burners in, everything. So the next step I want to do is I'd like to turn the furnace up. I want to see it run. So on this one, I had actually put on the burner box cover, but I'm going to end up taking it off, and you can see kind of the sequence a little bit of what's going on. First thing that you might have noticed, or you might be hearing in the back side here, is the inducer motor has kicked in, and of course the igniter is glowing, which is what it's supposed to do, and my burner's lit off right away. So one of the things that sometimes happens is you'll get it where the burners will maybe not want to light with the burner box cover off. So it depends on the unit and exactly how that is. This one had no issues at all. So far my flames are looking pretty good. They're fairly well defined. My burner to burner lit, you know, they lit off really well. No issues at all right there. So for the most part, I was pretty happy with the result. All right, the burner box cover is put back on, screws are in, everything is all good. We cleaned up everything inside of here, and everything lit off. The gas pressure was fine. I checked that, and now we're ready to just put the cover on. We'll do a little combustion test to make sure we're all good, but other than that, that was how to check and clean the burners.